Resident Representative ad interim, Dr. Charles Katz, Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State University, Permanent Secretaries from Ministries and Departments of National and Public Security, Police Commissioners, Heads of Agencies, CariSECURE Team Leader Mr. John Walcott and the CariSECURE Project Team, Police Executives, other specially invited guests, crime analysis trainees, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking you for joining us this afternoon for this virtual event. I am Miguel Trim from the CariSECURE team, and today I will be your Master of Ceremonies. For those who have been with us for the first 2 installments of this webinar series, welcome back. And for those joining us for the first time, I do hope that today's event encourages you to review the previous webinars to gain some insight into crime analysis and how this aspect of the project can impact regional police forces. CariSECURE, formerly titled Strengthening Evidence-Based Decision-Making for Citizen Security in the Caribbean, represents a partnership between the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. It is one of 3 components of the broader USAID Youth Empowerment Services, YES project, which aims to neutralize the catalysts of youth crime, violence, and victimization. CariSECURE specifically does so by building the capacity of national and regional institutions in 8 Eastern and Southern Caribbean states to collect, analyze, and use citizen security data to develop targeted, evidence-based policies and programs. Today's event is special and significant, not only as the final installment of CariSECURE's Crime Analysis webinar series, but as an event to mark the continuation and extension of the outstanding work that the project has been doing in beneficiary countries. During the first part of the program, we have with us specially invited partners who will share their reaffirmed commitment to the project and its ideals for the region. UNDP Multi-Country Office for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean realizes the importance of projects like CariSECURE that focus on improving peace and security and setting the foundations for sustainable development in the region. The MCO has been pleased to partner with USAID in implementing CariSECURE and its mandate. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Hugo Blanco, UNDP Resident Representative Interim from Barbados and for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, to give the welcome remarks. Over to you, Hugo.
Thank you very much, Miguel. I think protocol has been established, but in my capacity as acting UNDP resident representative, let me start by saying how pleased and honored we are by having Ambassador Linda Tagliatella, U.S. Ambassador to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, with us, as well as Mr. Didier Trebuch, UN Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS, Mr. Clinton White, USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean Regional Representative, as well as Dr. Charles Katz from the Arizona State University, and all representatives from the countries we serve, from Antigua and Barbuda, from Barbados, Grenada, from Guyana, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and of course Suriname. Trainees, crime analysis trainees, head of agencies, colleagues, it's really a pleasure for me giving these opening remarks in today's event that is, as you said, Miguel, twofold. On one hand, it marks the public announcement of the CariSECURE contract award project extension to September 2021, and the additional generous contribution and investment from USAID of $1,450,000. But also, today's event marks the conclusion of a 10th-month webinar series on crime analysis, facilitated by the Arizona State University. It's been a training and mentoring program fantastically led by Professor Katz that has changed regional capacities on this area. So for UNDP, CariSECURE is a very special project because it's based on a very strong partnership, regular dialogue, and shared views and vision about how best promote citizen security in the region. It started in 2016, and since then it has generated tangible and positive results in the beneficiary countries. This 5th year of support from USAID is therefore much welcome. only by UNDP, but particularly by the governments and the citizens of the 8 countries in which we operate. As we look forward to this 5th year of collaboration, I would like to take a few moments to reflect on this joint initiative with USAID, the governments, and UNDP. I'll be very brief, but the CariSECURE project is a regional initiative implemented by UNDP, and is one of the 3 components of the broader USAID Youth Empowerment Services project, YES, where over the last 5 years, the United States have invested more than $50 million to achieve the YES goals of reducing youth involvement in crime and violence. But why is this so critical? Across literature, youth are consistently identified as being both the primary victims and the primary perpetrators of crime across the Caribbean, often viewing violence as a useful tool for survival and social mobility, demonstrating very little faith in the efficacy of justice, law, and order. So with crime rates coinciding with negative economic and social indicators in the Caribbean, there is an increased need for an evidence-based, multi-sectoral response focused on prevention and empowerment. And this takes even more relevance now with COVID-19 and the very strong socioeconomic impacts we are seeing. The project hence supports building systems and capacities of public officers to analyze and use data to develop targeted policies to effectively reduce and prevent youth involvement in crime and violence. The project's rationale is based on the premise that increased use of both quantitative and qualitative information by public servants and state institutions will lead to evidence-based decision-making. With data, we can take evidence-based decision-making. That's at the core of this important project. It allows for the identification of successful strategies, programming interventions, and policies which can be replicated and scale up for national level impact. The sustainability of this initiative is at the core of its formulation. It's therefore with appreciation and responsibility that UNDP values the cooperative agreement with USAID and the substantive project investment, of which is anticipated that beneficiary countries will reach both deep and wide in our efforts to provide a platform that facilitates the expansion towards the integrated management information systems for justice agencies in the region. To conclude, I will speak on a very few deliverables CariSECURE has achieved so far in these 4 years of implementation, because I think it's very important to see where we are and where are we heading to. CariSECURE has completed a regional impact assessment on the implementation of automated applications in the police service, with findings suggesting that criminal justice agencies in general, and in the police specifically, produce little data for the development and implementation of evidence-based policy and programming. Secondly, CariSECURE has supported the development of international classification of crime for statistical purposes correspondence tables that, with the support of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, have served to identify over 100 regional citizen security indicators to standardize crime and violence. This is very important. This is all the region speaking the same language when we talk about crime and violence. Thirdly, CariSECURE has distributed ICT hardware and software to police forces of countries and further launched a digitized police incident form for data collection and application. And the fourth and last element I'd like to emphasize is the completed crime victimization survey, launched in St. Lucia, with findings from the survey has provided critical data for local decision makers to formulate and evaluate evidence-based citizen security police and programs. And CariSECURE will support advancing with the further intervention in this 5th year. There is much more to say that CariSECURE aims to do, including the crime observatory at the regional security system. And one of the key deliverables in support of the institutionalization necessary will be the deployment of police record management information systems, the famous PRIMS, across our 8 beneficiary countries. As we develop more robust systems in the region to protect our citizens and vulnerable groups, the work of CariSECURE is pivotal in guiding the policies and decisions that will sustain development in the region. So as we take part of these 2 significant project milestones today, it is clear that the project has seen marked successes in improving data-driven policing through digital platforms since its inception in 2016, and is being mindful of the impacts of the global pandemic, COVID-19. UNDP and CariSECURE has the other challenge now to adapt and innovate its project approach to help improve the way crime data is collected, the way it is analyzed, the way it is used for decision-making, and we will continue to innovate and inspire changes in attitudes, in beliefs, in awareness, and in expectations to move closer to the ultimate objective of ensuring a comprehensive and sustainable system for crime and violence data collection, analysis, and the use of effective policymaking. It is my hope that you find the event engaging and productive, and I really thank you for being here today. Over to you, Master of Ceremony.
Thank you, Mr. Blanco, for officially welcoming us this afternoon and for highlighting the importance of this partnership and the impact that CariSECURE is having in the region. CariSECURE's work feeds into our efforts towards Sustainable Development Goal 16, which focuses on peace, justice, and strong institutions. The United Nations is steadfast in its support for peaceful and inclusive societies and views the advancement of the rule of law at the national and international levels as essential for sustained and inclusive economic growth, sustainable development, the eradication of poverty and hunger, and the full realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the right to development. Mr. Didier Trebouc is the UN Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS. As Resident Coordinator, he leads the United Nations sub-regional team and is the highest ranking official of the United Nations Development System at country level. As Resident Coordinator, Mr. Trebouc works closely with national governments of the region to advocate the interests and mandates of the UN system while drawing on the support and guidance of the entire UN family. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Didier Trebouc, UN Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS. Over to you, Mr. Trebouc.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Miguel, for the introduction. Protocol has been established, but I want to recognize and thank the presence of US Ambassador Linda Tagliatella. Thank you for your continuous support. Our dear partner and I would say colleague, Mr. Clinton White, Regional Representative of USAID for the Eastern Caribbean and Southern Caribbean, permanent secretaries and commissioners of police and various government representatives from the Eastern and Southern Caribbean, and of course my colleague Hugo Blanco, resident representative at interim of UNDP, and along with CariSECURE project team. Well, first of all, again, good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's event on behalf of the United Nations team. I'm really delighted to participate in this event today because it formally announces the extension on the very important and impactful project, the CariSECURE project, which is being implemented by UNDP, as you know, with a very successful partnership with the United States agencies for international development. But today's ceremony, as was mentioned by Hugo as well and Miguel, also serves as a closing event for the project's crime analysis training and webinar series for problem-oriented community policing. I wish to extend warm congratulations to the recent crime analysis trainees. Such capacity building efforts will certainly enhance your ability to support effective government and community responses. So congratulations and best wishes to you all. So the UN, through UNDP, is really pleased to partner on this critical citizen security initiative that has been ongoing for a few years now, because it addresses youth crime and violence and policy making and programming in the Southern and Eastern Caribbean. And to that extent, I also join my thanks to Hugo in thanking the US government and USAID for this important contribution and partnerships. And we know that an average of 40% of the Caribbean population identifies crime and security-related issues, more so than poverty or inequality, as the main problems facing their country. Crime, particularly violent crime, with increasing youth involvement, is pervasive in the region and imposes a serious socio-economic burden on both citizens and government. So targeting the underlying social conditions amongst youth provides a great opportunity for transformative solutions and empowers them to tackle the structural drivers for peaceful societies. Moreover, within middle-income countries in the region, good governance will, of course, create socio-economic opportunities for institutional strengthening, and by extension also will improve citizen security. But failure to address this problem can result in the widening of the inequality gap and can also derail the attainment of the SDGs, particularly the SDG 16, while losing the gains of the last decade. So our United Nations current work in the region primarily focuses on capacity building for institutions, supporting women or other vulnerable groups, promoting a culture of peace and equitable access to justice. And the CariSECURE project has really been instrumental in strengthening the capacities of national and regional institutions on data collections and analysis to develop targeted, evidence-based policies and programs. These efforts are also being complemented by the Caribbean Regional Spotlight programs that seeks to fight violence against women and girls, and this project actually also contribute to this wider regional initiative with UNDP because it will support strengthening of gender-based disaggregated data collection for improving access to justice for women and girls. And as the Caribbean collectively grapples with the socio-economic shocks exacerbated by the COVID-19, including increasing job losses, gender-based violence, and rising of youth crime, it has become clear that innovative, country-specific approaches to governance will be needed to restore public trust. So in this regard, the effort by CariSECURE project to bring innovation via digitization and other modern methods in the crime fighting mix will significantly enhance the regional response. It also improves rule of law outcomes, especially in time of diminished resources and reducing, I would say, fiscal space by an enhanced public scrutiny on law enforcement tactics. So this partnership with regional justice agencies, including the police forces, can go a long way to improve the effectiveness in tackling crime and protecting the legal rights of the most vulnerable. And I recall a recent studies that was published by UNDP, which identified the lack of available data for the design of regional and national assessments and result-oriented solution as one of the salient challenge. So to this end, I believe that the CariSECURE project is well placed to continue to address these gaps in order to create a people-centered approach to justice that leaves no one behind. This is most needed as the UN system works on expanding our COVID multi-sectoral response plan for the year ahead, and will soon embark as well as UN system in the design of a new cooperation framework for sustainable development between the UN, the Caribbean countries, our respective partners. So again, I wish to congratulate USAID, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Caribbean governments, and UNDP on the contract award extension to September 2021, and extend best wishes for the successful rollout to foster a safe, cohesive, and just Caribbean that leaves no one behind. Special thanks again to Ambassador Tagliatella for your presence today, Clinton White, USAID representative, and Hugo, my colleague, and his CariSECURE team on the occasion of today's signing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trebuch, for your remarks that emphasize the synergies that have led to the successes and impacts we are starting to see within the citizen security sectors in our beneficiary countries, and how these can enhance our responses to some of the other challenges we are facing in the region. The CariSECURE project was made possible by the generous support of the American people through USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. USAID's work in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean directly supports US foreign policy priorities to fortify efforts to stem crime and violence and promote sustainable development growth programs. Ambassador Linda Tagliatella has served as a US ambassador to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, and the OECS since February 2016. She began her government career as a management analyst with the Government Accountability Office and later joined the State Department's Office for the Inspector General. She inspected some 45 embassies and consulates, evaluating post-operations and providing solutions to improve effectiveness and efficiencies. In her career at the State Department, Ambassador Tagliatella has led the department's efforts to transform the way human resources services are delivered globally and developed workforce analytics to align resources more closely with the department priorities. She has received numerous awards for her performance and has sponsored and mentored countless foreign service officers and civil service employees during the course of her career. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Linda Tagliatella to deliver remarks.
Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Protocol having been established, I will just proceed. It is great to be here today to reaffirm the United States as a committed partner in strengthening the region's efforts to modernize the criminal justice system. The Youth Empowerment Service, YES project, is a reflection of the strong partnership and cooperation between the United States Agency for International Development and 8 Eastern and Southern Caribbean countries. Over the last 5 years, through the work with you, we have invested more than $50 million to help reduce crime, promote public safety, and ensure that the Caribbean citizens have access to a fair justice system. One of those projects is CariSECURE, where 8 countries are revolutionizing the way they collect, analyze, and use crime data to support decision-making. Let me give you an idea of the magnitude of this project. Together, we celebrated 8 countries endorsing over 100 regional citizen security indicators. With these indicators, countries will be using a common set of crime and violence definitions across the region, which will improve reporting integrity and comparability. We also provided IT hardware and equipment to police forces in 8 countries. We conducted 2 national surveys on crime that are helping countries fill data gaps around the gender-based violence and victimization. More recently, we helped police forces begin transitioning from paper-based to digitalized criminal data collections, which many of you may know as the Police Reporting Information Management System, or PREMIS. I am told that many of you joining us today have invested more than 300 hours over a 7-month period to participate in the CariSECURE crime analysis training. These accomplishments are no small feat. We know it took an enormous amount of hard work, resilience, and unwavering commitment, and I offer my congratulations to each of you. I am also especially pleased to announce today an additional commitment of $1.4 million to UNDP. These funds will provide much needed IT hardware for more police stations across the countries. The extra funding will enable the program to expand the information system into a fully integrated police crime data platform, allowing for faster, easier, and more reliable access to criminal data. All this will be done with the additional 12-month extension given to the project, which will now end in September 2021. I also want to take this opportunity to recognize our implementing partner, the United Nations Development Program, and the CariSECURE team. Without them, these results would not be possible. In closing, let me reiterate my sincerest appreciation to all our partners who make our combined efforts such a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Tagliatella, for those poignant remarks. Undoubtedly, USAID has made a significant contribution to the security of the region through capacity building and the development of digital platforms to support evidence-based decision-making within the citizen security sector of our region. Indeed, the future for citizen security looks bright. Thanks to the commitment of USAID and the partnership with UNDP on the implementation of CariSECURE. Generous support of the American people, CariSECURE will receive an allocation of $1.45 million for September 2021. We look forward to the multiplier effects of this contribution to the region over time. So this marks the end of the first segment of the program. Thank you once again to Ambassador Tagliatella, Mr. Trebuk, and Mr. Blanco for taking the time to address us this afternoon. As we start the second half of the program, our officials will be taking their leave to attend to prior commitments. Thanks again. Charles Katz is the Director of the Center for Violence Prevention and Community Safety and is a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State University. His work focuses on police transformation and strategic responses to crime. He is no stranger to the region with the ministry. He is no stranger to the region. And he has worked with the Ministry of National Security of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to develop a comprehensive strategic plan to reform the Trinidad and Tobago police services. He also completed a project funded by the UNDP to assess citizen insecurity throughout the Caribbean and work with the Eastern Caribbean's regional security system to diagnose the gang problem in 9 Caribbean nations and develop a regional approach to responding to gangs. He has also completed several research projects for the US Department of Homeland Security and USAID in the region. Through this training program, Dr. Katz and his team have been extremely supportive of our trainee analysts and have remained flexible even amidst the challenges created by COVID-19. He is delivering this series of webinars to highlight the skills of our newly trained analysts to police commissioners and executives with a view to creating a cultural shift and the demand for crime analysis products from the top. I would now like to call on Dr. Charles Katz to deliver his presentation on crime analysis for problem-oriented and community policing. Dr. Katz, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to present to everybody today, making sure that I have the right screen up. But what I was going to talk to you about today is a little bit about the direction that crime analysis is going to permit agencies and police services in the Caribbean to move forward with. Some of you have seen the first few slides that I'm going to show, but I think that it's important to understand where we have been to understand why we are moving in the direction that we are going to be heading in the near future. And so, as some of you may recall, policing throughout the world began in London with the creation of the London Metropolitan Police. This was in the early 1800s and was largely a consequence of urbanization, crime, poverty, disorder that came about because of urbanization as a result of industrialization at around that time period. And they needed the police to be able to deal with a number of issues that the communities were dealing with in London. And one of the reasons why I always go through and reiterate some of these issues is to sort of demonstrate the temporal impact that Peel and the London Metropolitan Police had on policing today throughout the world. In most democratic nations, the mission of the police is similar. It is to prevent crime, deter crime, and this is done through a visible presence. That can be done whether foot patrol or in motorized patrol. And as we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 years, other methods of innovative patrol are going to be coming out. And the idea is that we were going to enhance the presence of the police, not just through putting them on the streets, but also through the uniforms that they wore, assigning them particular beats. And it was very much a military style or structure that the police took on. Many of you know that Peel was in the military before they moved him over to the police, and he was asked to start up the first police force. And as a result, he adopted a number of the principles that he had learned in the military. The rank structure was a big one. an authoritarian command structure where the police work from the top down, very much the opposite of what we expect in community policing, where it's the officers on the streets that are responsible for making a number of decisions that affect local communities. But he also started the police with the idea that they were authorized to use force. Force in terms of making arrests, physical force to be able to get somebody under control and make the arrest, as well as, if necessary, engage in deadly force. Over the next 100 years, we saw the police evolve substantially as a result of a number of technological innovations. The first one was the telephone. For the first time in nations that had created the police by the 1920s, they were able to call the police if they were in distress. This could be a business, this could be a home, it could be an apartment, but it allowed for the public to get a hold of the police very quickly, made it very easy. As a matter of fact, when we switched over to E99 systems, we call it 911 here in the States, we made it really easy for the public to contact the police and move forward with initiating any activity that they believed was necessary on the part of the police. And this resulted in a massive shift in public expectations by the public on the police. All of a sudden, everybody was expecting the police to be knowledgeable about what was going on within a fairly short period of time based on consumers or victims who were engaged, who had been a victim of a crime. We also started to see increased control over police officers in the streets and being able to get them to a crime scene much quicker through the invention of the two-way radio. All of a sudden, somebody could take the call for service at the station district, telephone through the contact through the two-way radio to the police officer on the streets, and be able to inform the officer where to move to be able to respond to a particular issue. It also helped get a better idea of what the police were doing with their time. But as we all know, that the police were still able to evade work to a certain extent through a number of different strategies. And we were really able to speed up this entire process once police agencies and police services started to implement vehicles to be able to respond quicker to calls for service. This not only allowed the police to get to a call much more quickly, but it also increased the amount of coverage that patrol was able to conduct. They were able to work through an area that was much larger than they had been able to do on foot. And perhaps even more importantly, it was much easier to make an arrest than it was in the past. As you recall, when an officer was on foot patrol, they had to somehow get the arrestee from wherever it was that they made an arrest back to the station district. If they were lucky, they were able to have some sort of a wagon come by and pick up the arrestee and move them, but that always wasn't possible. So you had to use whatever skills you had available to move an arrestee from wherever the scene was back to the detention facility. But this led to a number of disadvantages that have really hung on to the police community relationship and has created a number of issues. One is the police have much less contact with the public than they've ever had before. This is because they're driving around in vehicles rather than walking the beat and getting to know people on an informal basis. Each contact now that the public has with the police typically comes about because there's a problem. Either somebody is a victim of a crime, they're being pulled over for a traffic incident. And so all of a sudden, the police started to have a different type of relationship with the police, and that this relationship was only negative. And this also had an impact on the police. All of a sudden, the police were only dealing with the problems and were not part of informal contacts that took place where they got to see different side of different people that they oftentimes had contact with. And so the police and the public started to see each other in a different light. So this resulted in some fairly substantial problems with the relationship between the police and the public. The first is that the public started to want more and more from the police. They wanted E99 systems, emergency services to get the police to the scene much more quickly. They wanted more police officers to be more responsive and to be able to investigate more crimes in a more quickly. And they also had much more formal contacts with the public when compared to the past. In the past, they had much more informal contacts. If you think about it as a proportion, most of the time the police had contact with the public informally. Oftentimes it was positive, it was just check-ins. Now all of a sudden, the police were only being called in when there was a particular issue or problem. And they were really seeing the public at their worst. And the public was also seeing the police in terms of at their most official side, if it will, when they were officially processing a problem, making an arrest, oftentimes having to use force of one kind or another, rather than having positive interactions with the police officer. And so what we saw really from the 1920s through the 1980s in many nations is we saw that there were really three principal forms of strategies, or we call them technologies, that the police engaged in. That was random preventative patrol, it was rapid response to calls for service, and it was conducting criminal investigations. Those were the primary activities that the public held the police accountable for, and that the police agreed that they should perform these well. Now, as a consequence, we started to see an increase in evaluations of these three primary activities of the police. And what we found was that these activities did not have a substantial effect on dealing with what it is that both the police and public were interested in. First, we had the Kansas City Preventative Patrol experiment in the early 70s. This was an experimental study in which some communities received police services and others did not. When I say police services, I mean random preventative patrol. What they found was that random preventative patrol had no significant impact on crime, whether that was measured through official crime data or self-report data, victimization surveys that were conducted. It also had no impact on fear of crime or public perceptions of the police. We also did not see crime change in different areas that received different amounts of preventative patrol. We also examined in the early 80s response time. What we thought was that if the police get to a scene fast enough, they would be more likely to make an arrest. We found that response time had very little impact on crime. As a matter of fact, it only had an impact, or the potential for the impact, on about 3% of all issues that the police deal with, a very small proportion of problems that the police deal with. And instead, what researchers found was, instead of getting there quickly, what the public really wanted was an accurate assessment or information about when they were going to get to the person who had requested service. So if they say that they were going to be there right away, the public expected them to be there right away. If the police service informed them that they will be there within 1 hour, the public was fine with that, as long as they were told they will be here within an hour. The problems crept in when it took longer for the police to get there than what they were told. So aligning expectations between the police and public was important in terms of citizen satisfaction with police services. Third, we found that police investigations were not near as effective as we thought that they might be. Researchers now have repeatedly found that only about 3% of investigations are solved because of some special investigative technique like fingerprints, DNA, and the such. Instead, most investigations are solved, and we get a high detection rate because of a witness comes forward, victims are willing to speak in court, but it's really the public's relationship with the police that results in investigations being successful, not special investigative techniques like fingerprints and others. And so this led to a massive rethinking in the 1980s about what it is that we should expect of the police. And people began to understand that our current strategies were entirely too reactive. We can't just count on police officers driving around at will and believe that that is going to have an effect. It has very minimal effect, if any. We know that dedicating additional resources to fingerprints and other special investigative strategies are really going to have a minimal impact on the majority of crimes that the public are concerned with. Second of all, what we learned was that we may need to think about responding to crime through targeted, proactive responses. So rather than being reactive and address all problems the same and be very general, instead, what we learned is we may need to think about issues in a more targeted, proactive way. And that includes our relationship with the public. And that is why crime analysts are so important to police agencies today, and why we see the need for a crime analyst for about every 100 officers that an agency has, so that officers have the kind of information that they need to be able to target responses and address problems as specifically or with as laser-like focus that is possible. And so we've entered into this new era of policing in terms of data-driven policing. We expect the police to be much more efficient today because we're going to be able to direct resources to the specific problems that exist rather than just sort of a general response to problems. We also have increased expectations that the police are going to be able to objectively identify problems. Right? We're going to have the data to identify the problems, and we're going to develop very specific responses to those problems. The public has increased expectations of accountability. They want to know what's going on and how the police are responding to the problem. So in the current state of policing, there are really three strategies that are expected of the police today, in large part because they're one of the few strategies that have been empirically found to be effective. Now, with that said, there are not many evaluations of the police using these three strategies in the Caribbean. The evaluations of these strategies have largely taken place in the US, Canada, and Western Europe, as well as some parts of Asia. But there's a lot of reasons to believe that they would be effective in the Caribbean as well. If you're ever interested in learning more about those strategies that have been empirically found to be effective, typically this means that there are experiments conducted much like you would a medical trial. Some areas or people get a treatment, other areas and people are not permitted to get the treatment. And then you look at change from before and after the treatment was administered. And what I wanted to focus on today is hotspot policing and problem-oriented policing, which are two components oftentimes included in police services, community-oriented policing response to issues that they face. And the reason is, I wanted to focus on these two, is because they require strong crime analysis, data-driven strategies, and focused responses. If you're ever interested in the future, I can also give a talk on focused deterrence, but that would take more time than we have that is available today. But if you are interested in best practices, feel free to go to crimesolutions.gov and you'll be able to identify all sorts of data-driven strategies that have been found to be effective through science. Now, with hotspot policing, one of the few strategies that we know that is effective is hotspot policing. Instead of taking your officers and randomly driving around in a particular area, what we think that we know is the best strategy today is instead have them park in the areas where you have hotspots, right? And what they do is they stay in those hotspots for roughly 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and then they move to another hotspot. Some police agencies have what they call a playbook. And every day, the station commander will hand out the playbook, and that tells the patrol officers where they want them to be parking in the hotspots. These are very small places. A hotspot is a very small place where we have a high level of crime over one year period or more. And the idea is that we focus our resources in these hotspots through directed patrol, problem-oriented policing, or things like repeat offender program. We also can put up signs. A number of communities put up signs letting them know that there is a hotspot there so that individuals engage in more protective activities. This is just one example of the generalizability of the idea of hotspots. It's called the law of crime concentration. As you can see here, roughly 4 to 6% of locations in these 5 cities are responsible for at least 50% of criminal activity in those communities. So in other words, a small number of hotspots are responsible for 50% or more of crime that takes place in these cities, such as Seattle, New York, Tel Aviv, Cincinnati, and the such. We have found similar things in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, and some of your crime analysts have found some of these same issues with regard to a homicide. Now, this is a very weak way of looking at a problem community. It was by station district and homicides in Trinidad and Tobago for a period when I was working there. But as you can see, that we have an area that makes up less than 1% of the nation is responsible for roughly 20% of the homicides, right? We found a very small number of communities there were responsible for the vast majority of homicides. The idea was to concentrate and focus resources there if possible. Now, one of the ways that we know that hotspot policing works was an experiment done in Minneapolis, where they literally identified 110 hotspots that existed for over a year. They took 55 of these hotspots and randomly assigned them treatment, where an officer would park there for a short period of time, roughly 15 to 20 minutes. And then the other 55 areas that were randomly selected just received normal treatment, random preventative patrol as normal. And what they found was that in 20 out of 25 spots that crime declined by a fairly reasonable size. It's not going to solve all your problems, but we do know that it has a significant effect within the community. We know that we even get more of a bang for our buck if we not only include hotspot patrol or directed patrol to those communities, but if we also engage in problem-oriented policing within those communities, where we can really get a lot of impact with a small amount of resources in a relative sense. And so I'm going to sort of pivot over now to problem-oriented policing. Problem-oriented policing is, quite frankly, not an easy process to go through, but it is the strategy that we know is the most effective at reducing crime and disorder within particular communities. Many of you are already aware of problem-oriented policing. It starts off with scanning, and we move, we're basically just trying to identify basic problems. Then we go through an analysis phase where we deep dive into the data to understand what the causes of the crime is. And then we develop a response. This response is oftentimes multifaceted. And then we conduct an evaluation to see if our strategies are effective. What I wanted to do was go through and take you through an example, because this was an example that I worked on with a colleague here. It was a runner-up in the Goldstein Awards. It was a well thought of project. And I think it demonstrates the idea of problem-oriented policing well. The other reason why I use it is that its roots were really laid in the Caribbean, in Trinidad. The project that we engaged in Glendale was directly related to work that we were doing in Trinidad and Tobago with the schools and police there. We started up a violence prevention academy. Each school had 4 to 5 individuals who were responsible for addressing crime within their school, based on a number of the strategies that I'll go through here, but it was based on each school. We found that it was a very effective strategy in reducing crime, whether it be violence, gambling, drug sales, fights, a whole host of other activities. You can find that information on our website. But we took what we learned from the Violence Prevention Academy in Trinidad, and then we applied it in Glendale. This was a relationship that we had with the PD there. And the idea was that we were going to go into a deep dive and identify those problems that were plaguing the community and were really disrupting a way of life for the community, as well as police resources and how police resources were allocated within the community. So what we did was we took them through 20 hours of classroom training over 3 months. We trained roughly 20 officers, 2 sergeants, a lieutenant, and 2 crime analysts. And then what we did was we took them through the steps of SARA, where they scanned for problem, and we went through a deep analysis with them. Now, Glendale engages in this process today. It didn't stop with this project. We just received federal funds through the Department of Justice to do this, and to really make sure that it was a sustainable strategy used within the community. What we found was, and the patrol officers brought forward, was that they really had an issue with community policing, or I'm sorry, with Circle Ks. What we saw was, through patrol officers, they thought that Circle Ks were generating a disproportionate amount of crime in their communities. Now, I'm not quite sure if I have seen some forms of Circle Ks within your communities. They exist in Canada, the US, much of Central America, and I have seen a few on some Caribbean islands, but it is your basic convenience store is a Circle K. It's just a corporation-owned convenience store where you can get gas, you can get soda, coffee, treats, beer, whatever it is that you want. They're like miniature supermarkets on a small level. So the officers and crime analysts said, yeah, we do think Circle Ks are generating a lot of problems. And so we started to look into it a little bit further. And when we looked at it, we were shocked. We found that some Circle Ks had more than 1 call for service to the police every day. You could see one of them, the one on 4306 West Maryland, in 2010 had almost 500 calls for service to the police over a 1-year period. And we had others that had 200 or more. This was not a small problem. This really affected the quality of life within these communities. It affected the people who are being victimized in these convenience stores. There were some people who had been killed due to robberies in these stores. And we also saw an enormous amount of police resources being dedicated to Circle Ks. This is a map of what it looks like. The red dots are those that are Circle Ks. The black dots are non-Circle Ks. The bigger the dot, the more calls for service to that convenience store. What you can see is that the red dots, which are the Circle Ks, were much larger than non-Circle Ks, even when they were next door to each other. We found that Circle Ks, what one lieutenant called them, was that they are a magnet for crime. And he repeated that every day to an officer. These stores are crime magnets. We have to do something about the problem. So what they did was, after they looked at the data, talked to people at stores, they conducted, or they came up with 6 basic strategies to address the problem. One was CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. I'll get through what that means in a second. They proposed policy changes to Circle K to try to get them to change how they ran their stores in ways that would reduce crime. They also conducted directed patrols and focused on repeat offenders. And then they also engaged in prevention activities, put out posters talking about how to prevent crime in Circle K's. The mayor's youth advisory committee worked with schools to develop videos that were shown within schools on problems associated with convenience store crime and how to avoid being involved in it and why not to engage in it. They basically created these videos that were shown actually on regular television, but also within the schools. And the whole thing was run and done by high school kids. The first response that we attempted to implement was CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. One of the problems that the police officers identified was that these stores had poor lighting. There was not addresses listed on the store. You had beer on the floor right next to the door. People could just come in, walk in, grab a case of beer, walk out. There was a lot of obstructions in the line of sight. You could see in one of the pictures here, there were advertisements in all of the windows. Nobody could see in, even if a crime was occurring. There was no way to know about it by people who were outside of the store. There was also a lot of panhandling, trespassing. There was some prostitution and drug sales taking place. We also found that there was only one clerk. Most convenience stores have 2 or more clerks working at a time. Circle K's had a policy of only 1. We also found that there were a lot of other things, not just beer hanging out, but employees had purses out. They didn't have a place to put them in a locker. Yet we found that there were lottery cards that were easy to steal if somebody wanted to steal them. So the idea was to really change the physical environment in which these stores were operating and get the store to change them so that they were safer. We also wanted Circle K to change a culture in which they operated with the police. They wanted the Circle K's to share more information with the police in terms of who the offenders were. Sometimes Circle K's would know who they were, but were not sharing that information with the police. We also wanted to collect more information from victims of Circle K crimes. We wanted to start dealing with trespassing issues. We wanted to engage in Glendale training employees, as well as training people on how to use in-store surveillance systems so that they were more effective than they were. And as a result, we had meetings with corporate Circle K a couple of times. Unfortunately, we had an enormous amount of resistance to Circle K, where they just stopped making phone calls back to the local police department, to the point where the lieutenant could no longer communicate with them. Circle K started to publicly blame the Glendale Police Department, saying that this is Glendale's problem and that they did not have the problem in other cities. This was sort of ironic because we were talking to other cities in the metropolitan area. They were having the same problem. So they would tell one city like Mesa saying, look, we don't know why you all are having a problem. Glendale doesn't have a problem. And then they would tell people in Glendale that they're the problem, not that Mesa's or that Glendale's the problem. Mesa doesn't have a problem. So they were pitting one city against another. So the way that we dealt with that was the police were a little nervous about going public with this. So they asked us to do it. They asked us to meet with the largest communities in the city, get their data, analyze it, and verify that everybody had a problem. And what they found was that it was a valley-wide problem that affected all the large cities. And the police asked us to publish the report and put it out in the newspaper. We had TV interviews. And what that did was that brought Circle K back to the table and being willing to sit with the police department and start to engage in responses that the police had requested that they engage in. At the same time that this was going on, there were serious suppression efforts taking place. Undercover operations where the police were watching Circle K's, making arrests when people were running out with beer, armed robberies. Sometimes they were hanging out in the Circle K waiting for it to happen. And then they were debriefing the arrestees to find out what was going on and why they were picking Circle K's. What they found was the reason for it was that Circle K's dealt with offenders very differently than the mom and pop stores. The mom and pop stores were very willing to take things into their own hands, which very much made the offenders nervous, where Circle K employees pretty much had a hands-off attitude and basically did not respond other than typically calling the police. They also found that Circle K's kept items near the door. It was easy to steal things. They also found that there was only one employee rather than multiple employees. So it was just a lot easier to engage in crime at Circle K's versus others. In terms of what took place over that couple months, over weekends, there were 57 arrests. A lot of merchandise was recovered. There were several, about 2/3 of the arrests resulted in a conviction, some of them for very lengthy sentences. And then the police department advertised this at Circle K's, how many arrests that they had made. They would put up a flyer, let people know that these arrests had been made the week prior to try to notify people about the problem and how they were responding to it. I already mentioned to you that the juveniles in schools worked on trying to prevent crime within Circle K's. They very much singled out Circle K. Circle K did not appreciate this, but it was something that the police and community felt that it was important because all the problems were occurring at Circle K's. So they were putting these posters up in school bathrooms. They were putting them up on light poles near Circle K's and the such to notify people that they would be arrested even if they stole something like beer, which a lot of the kids were doing. Unfortunately, some of those beer runs would turn into problems, which is why the police focused on it. It wasn't just stealing the beer and drinking it, but sometimes employees would try to stop them and the employee would get hurt. It wasn't uncommon for somebody who was also there, just a customer, would try to steal a youth, stop a youth from stealing the beer, and it would turn into a shooting between the people. And so it was always more than just beer crime. It also turned to violence fairly regularly. Following the response and getting Circle K on board, albeit forcefully, we started to see things really improve at Circle K's. You can see here that they started to take down all of the posters. So police officers did not have to go in and look around. They could actually just park outside, make sure that everything was okay. It was much more, looking inside was much more visible. They put in height charts so that they would know how tall people were if they did engage in criminal activity. They increased lighting. They started to call the police even when loitering was taking place to be able to get rid of the prostitutes and those engaging in drug sales. It really cleaned up those Circle K's. You can see here that it resulted in about a 40% decline in crime at those Circle K's, the study Circle K's. We primarily focused on the six worst. The intervention ended up having an impact on the broader Circle K stores, the other 9, because Circle K instituted the policies that we recommended. So it had an impact on Circle K's that were not targeted as well, but just not as much. And then non-Circle K's actually had a slight increase in crime. So we found that the intervention on Circle K's was an effective strategy. And it also lasted for a lengthy period of time. We had a doctoral student do their dissertation on it, and we found that it lasted for years after the project had taken place. So it was a sustainable response. It was a response that was sustained not just for the year of the project, but it also lasted for years after. With that, those are sort of the 2 primary programs that we see as largely being driven by crime analysis, that why we think crime analysis is vital for agencies to be involved in. And that's because it will take a police agency from that reform era or traditional policing to being able to engage in some of the most effective strategies that the police have in their toolbox today. And without crime analysts, these types of activities can simply not be carried out. So with that, we'll go ahead and open it up for questions, and I'll turn it back over to our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Trim.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Katz, for that very interesting presentation on the origins and applications of problem-oriented community policing. I think your practical examples of how these strategies are applied within communities was very insightful. And I'm really interested to see how our regional police forces can employ these strategies in the near future. As you said, we can now move into the Q&A segment. So if you have any questions for Dr. Katz, you can use the Q&A button to post a question. If you wish to speak and know that your mic is working fine, you can raise your hand and our admin will unmute you.
I would like to say that we did carry out problem-oriented policing a number of times in Trinidad and Tobago. We found that it was extremely effective in dealing with auto theft in car parks. We also applied it to some tourism crime in Tobago, where we did a thorough assessment of issues there and worked with some of the resorts and hotels at dealing with tourism-focused crime. This type of work can be done in the Caribbean. I would really strongly encourage some of you to think about engaging in hotspot policing, in problem-oriented policing as part of your overall strategy in addressing what the community needs and what it is that the community is asking for.
I think we have Diane unmuted. Do you have a question, Diane?
In the meantime, we do have a question. It looks as though from Grenada. It says,
Yes.
Stations and departments are oftentimes mandated by our administration to implement community policing initiatives, yet with no standard variable measuring mechanism. How would our administration be able to measure a station or department commitment to community policing if such a mechanism exists? Yes. We, along with a number of other academics, partner with police agencies very frequently on these types of activities in terms of implementation of community policing. And there are a number of measures that can be used. We also have training protocol if any of you are interested. No money. If you're interested in it, we're more than glad to put on a presentation on this issue. As a matter of fact, we can even incorporate some of the community policing work that we've done in other nations, including the Caribbean, on this. But you know, the short answer is there are a number of measures that you will want to use. First and foremost, just your contact with the community, however that contact takes place. More importantly, it is through community surveys. Community surveys are probably the most common strategy that the police gain an understanding of what it is that's going on in their community. Every agency will collect this information differently. It can be door to door through a number of mechanisms. You can mail it out through your postal services, through if you have people who are receiving power and electricity legitimately, you can do it through bills. When I'm down in Honduras, police officers are doing them door to door as part of their community policing initiatives, going and knocking on doors, asking people to tell them what it is that they care about most. And what it is, you start to collect that information and tabulate it so that you know which neighborhoods care about which problems. In some neighborhoods, it might be traffic. In others, it could be robbery. It's just highly dependent upon what is going on. But the first step is always to identify what it is that the community is interested in. Another part of that is looking at how the community thinks about the public, or sorry, how the community thinks about the police. This oftentimes means that they are surveying the public about their perceptions. This you normally cannot have the police officers do, but instead you have to have some sort of an outside entity. This can be youth in the community that is part of a service project. It can be going to community forums and for instance, at faith-based churches or faith-based organizations, and working with those folks to fill out surveys or work with them to conduct surveys. It really depends upon what you're doing, but almost all of it requires working with your community to identify what they see as the problem and what they think about the police. Now, there are a lot of indicators that can be used. And we could always talk about some of those performance measures at another time. It's a great question, though.
I see we have a question, a hand raised in the chat. Diane. Okay. In the meantime, we have another question. Dr. Katz, do you think that social reform and economic reconstruction is crucial to aid in dealing with the crime situation in the region, especially involving young people?
Yeah, those are very general sort of issues, and so I'll make the assumption that we know what the specific problem is in that regard. What we do know is that when we respond generally to something, just sort of a blanket strategy of addressing a problem in very general terms, that is almost never effective. What we do know is that when we target specific people, neighborhoods, or problems, that it's very effective. So if dealing with, when you say economic reconstruction, if that is being specifically targeted at a particular group, for instance, a particular segment of the economy that's encountering problems, or people that are having trouble finding work, young people who have not entered the workforce, those strategies can be effective. But with that said, we need to address the public's expectations about how quickly those strategies are going to work. We typically have two different strategies, broad-based strategies that we want to think about. One are distal causes of crime. Distal causes of crime are those that are sort of root problems in societies that affect general levels of criminality or problems. Those types of issues oftentimes require social reform and economic reconstruction, depending upon how you're thinking about that. But that can sometimes take 3 to 5 to a generation to accomplish the kind of goals that you're talking about. These aren't quick fixes. These are things that one administration or government has to be able to count on the next administration and government to carry out. That's the most helpful, right? And then we also have proximate causes. Proximate causes are the things that the police and other institutions can deal with today and have an impact over the near future. That near future meaning can have an impact tomorrow or over the next year. Sometimes it takes a while to roll out those responses. But we need to think about our responses in different buckets and what our expectations are for their impact and how long that impact will take to achieve.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Katz. Diane, we have a hand raised in the chat. Can we unmute Diane? Do we have any other questions? Okay, we have some in the Q&A. Dr. Katz, what, in your opinion, are the essential tools that are required for mentoring young offenders?
Great question. That largely depends on when you say young offenders, the types of offending that they're engaged in. We have different tiers or buckets that we need to think about young offenders. If they're engaged in status offenses or minor offenses, if they're involved in property crimes, even minor forms of violence, pushing, shoving, it can even be a minor assault. I'm not talking about shootings, stabbings, is my point. There are a number of different strategies that can be effective. There are some, depending on if you're talking about drugs, there are some very specific drug-focused interventions that are available. If you're talking about gang activity, especially in the early stages, or trying to prevent youth from joining a gang, we know that the gang resistance education and training program has been found to be effective. And then if you're talking about some forms of violence, we know that there are some strategies that are effective, such as ART, aggression replacement therapy. There are a number of different strategies. The other one that I would like to note that is really gaining some steam, that we've now had positive results for this strategy in Honduras as well as Guyana, is the Family Matters program run by CFYR in the Caribbean. It's run in St. Kitts, St. Lucia, and Guyana. Our sample sizes were a little low in St. Kitts and St. Lucia, so I'm not quite sure how it shook out there. It's tough to really know, but in Guyana, and it was also implemented in Honduras, where we have family-based intervention programs where youth who are at high risk for problem behavior such as crime, drug use, gangs, can get family counseling over a year's period, and that counseling is related to a reduction in risk factors for youth. I think that strategy has a lot of promise. We've been looking at it in the Caribbean. I think it's worthwhile to consider moving forward with that initiative. But there really are a number of strategies. If you would like, email me and I can send you some specifics. Some mentoring programs that are out of a can. I call it a can because they have written guidelines for how they're supposed to be done. Those strategies, there's some good ones and there's some that are not so good. If you like, you can look on crimesolutions.gov. It will point you in the direction, or I can work with you in identifying those programs and make sure you get them in your toolbox.
Okay, we have a comment here from Glenn Charles. He said, if we work with a plan, then we can measure the outcome because one of the components of the plan is expected outcomes. So you will know if your objective has been achieved. I think that's in response to your earlier response to the previous question.
Right, and I do think that we need to be honest and realistic about our expectations of responses. So when we have a plan, I work a lot with gun crime units here in the States, and one that I work with is Phoenix Police Department. And we started the project out, they had a very ambitious goal that they're gonna reduce gun crime. Well, based on what their goals are, I'm not sure we can really achieve reducing gun crime in general, but what we can do is, not over the 1-year project period that they have, but what they can do is increase the number of gun crimes that result in an arrest, the number of gun crimes that result in a conviction, so that over time deterrence increases and crime will decline. And so we want to think about our outcomes very judiciously, and we want to be very careful about not setting ourselves up for expectations that simply aren't possible.
Okay. Diane Dumont, I see you still have your hand raised. You can unmute your mic and speak if you have that burning question. Or type it in the Q&A.
In the meantime, we do have a question here by ASP Joseph from Grenada. Sorry, I have to look at the screen a little closer as my eyes are getting a little weak. Do you believe that social media in particular has a role to play in the drama, sensationalized, and glamorized crimes such as murder, rape, weaponized crimes against youth? I do believe that in terms of the police response, social media today is a must by police leadership. And it can even be within your, if you're a station district commander, it can be an important tool in your arsenal. I think that as part of any community policing strategy, we need to be able to quickly and efficiently communicate with people, especially when crimes, violent crimes, vicious crimes occur, so that people are getting accurate and correct information from those who have it, rather than allowing rumors to take place. This means that you are reacting oftentimes within minutes of events, maybe an hour of an event, not 12 hours later, a day later. Instead, the idea is to get out in front of a particular issue so that rumors cannot start and they don't start. And then also when things change, to be able to course correct on social media and follow through and be able to say, okay, we first thought this, we now have information that suggests that that is not accurate, and instead we think that this is accurate, at least for a short period of time, to keep people moving in the right direction. Oftentimes, commissioners and commanders do not have the time to be focused on these issues. Now, a lot do. The commissioner of police in Boston, New York, LA, these individuals do post frequently on Twitter and Facebook, and they're very active in that form. Others don't do that. Instead, they have one of their public relations officers who are always accompanying them everywhere they go, do the actual tweeting or Facebooking to keep the discussion moving in the right direction, rather than in a direction that starts rumors. But the key is, you have to be willing to provide at least some specifics to make sure that people are aware that you do have the right information, and that it's not just completely built on you trust me because you have to trust me. You can't take that for granted. Instead, you're using this as a tool to increase trust between the police and the public.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Do we have any more questions?
I see one here. It says, the church seems to be endangered species in the bringing up of youth these days. Do you think that churches and partnerships with parents can change the dynamic and behavioral pattern of youth and crimes? Without a doubt, I do. And this is not necessarily in the way that some of you might feel comfortable with, but one of the strategies that we did not discuss today, it's called focused deterrence. One of the strategies that is very effective is actually using the church as well as parents or grandparents of youth who attend that church or part of that faith-based community. And the idea is, and I'm going to give you the elevator speech, but the idea is you find out who's committing the crimes and you have enough evidence on them to make an arrest, but you don't make an arrest. Instead, you work with the grandparents, the parents, the faith-based community. You bring them into the same room as the youth who is engaged in this activity. You in part shame them into saying, we know what you're doing. If you don't behave, the police who are sitting over here are going to arrest you. You're going to be convicted, and they're going to do it with our support. We want you to change. We want you to engage in this kind of behavior, and you offer them other alternatives. Whether that be work, whether that be social activities that are appropriate. And you use the grandparents and parents affiliation with the church to bring this group together to be able to exhibit social control without the need to make an arrest. This can be hard for the police and prosecutors to sometimes swallow. What I can tell you is it's been done in dozens of cities, and it's been found to be very effective. You have to give up on your idea that every crime has to be an arrest and a prosecution, but instead save that as a lever in your tool, because some offenses don't necessarily require it. Now, I'm not saying if somebody engages in armed robbery that that's the way you want to handle it. That may not be right for your community. But what we have seen is that it's been very effective in street level drug sales. It's been very effective in dealing with drive-by shootings. It's been very effective in dealing with domestic violence, so much so that the U.S. Department of Justice has been giving out millions of dollars to communities to implement this program. But some of them do have a tough time getting over this idea that they're not going to make an arrest, that instead they're going to use it as a lever to get somebody not to commit a future crime.
Okay, we have one last question. We have a hand raised in the chat. N. Wells, you can unmute your mic and speak your question. Wells, you can speak your question. Okay, so I think we can move on. So thanks for all your very astute questions. And thank you, Dr. Katz, for so knowledgeably responding to them. As we close the curtains on today's activities and what has been a very interesting webinar series, I'd like to call last, but certainly not least, on CariSECURE's team leader and my colleague, Mr. John Walcott, to take us home with the closing remarks.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Miguel, and thank you, Dr. Katz, for your presentation, transitioning traditional policing to data-driven policing. This journey started back in November of last year, and so we've counted it as 10 to 11 months of effort. Commendations to all of our trainees who took part in the crime analysis training, 24 of you, and they stretch across the 8 beneficiary countries of CariSECURE. But in addition, we also trained analysts within Trinidad and Tobago, and also at the RSS and CARICOM impacts. I want to recognize the fact that we had a large contingent of participants today, 88 in total, some 78 attendees and 10 panelists. And I think that's a real testament to the interest that this particular intervention is stirring up, and also to the support that the commissioners of police, PSs, other heads of agencies are given to their trainees who would have attended the crime analysis training. Today, therefore, ends the crime analysis training from a training perspective. We had 4 training modules, and we had our graduation back on September 14th for our participants, and we handed out some very nice awards, including the best crime analysis team award, which went to our friends and colleagues in St. Lucia. As it relates to where we go next, we're looking at doing some training of trainers to have that function be available within the region. And we have managed to get the support of RSS and CARICOM impacts, who will be the trainers of the crime analysis within the region. And therefore, it is very much available to the various ministries within public security and national security to take advantage of that particular curriculum that's going to be available. And that should be available in the new year. The training of trainers will conclude very early in the new year. We've had some setbacks as it relates to COVID due to face-to-face restrictions. But certainly as we continue the CariSECURE project, we will notify you as to when that training can be fully taken up. I also want to just pay special mention to our special guest today, Ambassador Tagliatella, from the U.S. Ambassador to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Didier Tribuc, our UN Resident Coordinator, Barbados and the OECS, Clinton White, USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean Regional Representative, Hugo Blanco, our UNDP, Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean Resident Representative ad interim, And also, we mentioned Dr. Katz, Professor Katz from the Arizona State University. We also had on the call today noted special guests from the PSs across each of the ministries in the region, commissioners of police, heads of agencies, and of course, our crime analysis trainees were also in attendance. I think I want to leave you with 4 key things that I gathered from today's session, and they come out of the speeches that we would have heard earlier. So thank you very much to USAID for the allocation of additional 1.45 million to the CariSECURE project, which will allow us to do what was stated as revolutionize citizen security. We also heard from Mr. Tribok from the UN, and he made special reference to the people-centered approach of CariSECURE, as well as leaving no one behind. Hugo Blanco, our resident representative AI, spoke to the fact that CariSECURE has shown that improving data-driven policy through digital platforms is making strides, and we see that within the technology that we've deployed thus far within the region. And also we would have heard from Dr. Katz on that transition where we looked at the reform era to start with, data management, which came afterwards, and then realizing that traditional policing strategies were limited, and therefore the era of data-driven policy, or policing rather, emerged, and that centered around data, insights, and strategy. So I just wanted to summarize all of that to say that it very much came across today that everything that we're doing around citizen security and access to justice and rule of law has a direct relationship to our community. And therefore, it's important for us as we develop strategies, and this data that's collected will help us to do that, that we look at how best we can implement those strategies within our community. Essential to that, obviously, is going to be the fact that we're using data now to drive our intelligence and create the knowledge, and therefore work very increasingly to put policies in place as quickly as we can using that data that is now being collected. And of course, we need the funding to do this, and so that's where the USAID has played their part, as well as the relationship that we have with them and their technical support as well for delivering of this project. And lastly, then I want to say that what we've taught and trained and showcased over the last many months is only valuable if we're now going to do something with it. And so it's very important for us as CariSECURE continues for another year that we're able to understand the importance of institutionalizing these techniques and tools that we've been given and that have been made available. And so when I think of the commitment for the USAID throughout the region with the YES program, I'm also reminded of the journey to self-reliance. And that is not a straightforward journey. It is one where we have to assess what is it that we need in terms of the tools and the gaps that we have. We have to accelerate. So in terms of being able to identify the policies and key policies that we will have to implement in order to reduce our crime and violence. And then we have to assign, which is essentially to put it into practice now. And so I'm reminded of those 3 A's out of the USAID's journey to self-reliance. So thank you very much for taking part. Thank you very much for your attention today. It has certainly been a significant day for us with the 2 milestones that have been mentioned. And CariSECURE will continue, and you'll hear more about us certainly in the press and through other media opportunities about the good work that CariSECURE is doing. So we thank you for your attention today. Over to you, Master of Ceremonies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those remarks, John. I would like to echo your sentiments and thank everyone who participated today and overall in the webinar series. I'd like to thank Dr. Katz and his team at ASU for putting together this most interesting series of webinars and so eloquently presenting the information in a very interesting way. Also to our special guests, Ambassador Linda Tagliatella, Mr. Didier Terbouk, UN Resident Coordinator, and Hugo Blanco, our UNDP Resident Representative, AI, and to John, Mr. Walcott, and the entire CariSECURE team for putting together this very exceptional series. Special mention to Shani Leacock and Gerard Wells for their work on the communications and IT support for this activity, to Sharon Ramsaran and the team at USAID for their insights and their input and their behind the scenes contribution to making this happen today and to the series. And of course to USAID for their continued support to the CariSECURE project. Thank you very much. As John said, the information presented only becomes useful once we start using it to really impact the policing in the region. So I would like to encourage you to go back through the webinar series. The recording should be available online shortly to really catch up on what it is that your crime analysts have been exposed to and what you can hope to benefit from in your police forces regionally. So once again, thank you for your attendance today and look forward to more great things from the CariSECURE project.